Welcome back to Out of the Fog. Well, this month is marked as Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder Awareness Month, otherwise known as ADHD. This is a time my next guest has been looking forward to in terms of spreading awareness and education about the disorder. Now, to tell us about his personal story with ADHD, the symptoms and the myths surrounding it, I'm now joined by certified ADHD coach with Spectrum Consultants Group, Mr. Brett Thornhill. Welcome to Out of the Fog.
Thanks very much for having me.
Well, ADHD is something, we hear about it often in our community. People obviously talk about ADHD, but might not exactly know what it means. If you can just define what ADHD is.
Well, sure. There's ADHD, first of all, stands for, as you mentioned, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And although it does certainly affect your attention and ability to focus and pay attention, the definition has actually broadened quite a bit with more recent research. And now it's seen to be more of an impairment of the executive functions of an individual. And executive functions are a set of cognitive processes that really direct goal-driven behavior. So we're talking about things like working memory, inattention, certainly, organizational skills and organizational behaviors, planning, those sorts of things.
Right. And in terms of diagnosis, I mean, a child can be diagnosed, you can be diagnosed as an adult. Do the symptoms, I guess, vary depending on the age?
The symptoms, what causes the symptoms, of course, doesn't change. The symptoms manifest themselves in, in different ways. So with a child, you may see, particularly with a male child, you may see quite a bit more of the hyperactivity and the drive and that sort of behavior. With young girls, you generally don't see that. It usually presents itself with much more in the way of inattention, daydreaming. You don't see that hyperactivity trait. And then with adults, quite often adults present with symptoms like anxiety and low-grade depression and those sorts of things, because the hyperactivity that's quite acceptable as a child, you tend to suppress that as you become an adult, to kind of conform to social norms, and therefore you kind of internalize that restlessness, and that can cause a lot of anxiety and a lot of issue with trying to live up to what you think your potential is and that kind of thing.
Right. You were diagnosed yourself at the age of 43. How has your life changed when you look at going through those years before the 43 and then after being diagnosed? Well,
it's funny, because I talk quite openly about when I was diagnosed at 43. It was the beginning of what I like to call Brett 2.0. And it really provided a 180 for my life. I spent 20 years in advertising and marketing, and a lot of my life, there were just things that didn't make sense. And the diagnosis helped me kind of make sense of those things and explain those things. So while I will never say that ADHD itself is a gift or ADD is a gift, the diagnosis certainly can be, because when you become diagnosed, you then know what you're dealing with. And it's a very treatable disorder. So once you know what you're dealing with, it allows you then to be able to develop strategies and develop tactics to be able to know exactly how you want to manage your life from that point forward.
Do you find that in terms of people being diagnosed, I've heard it in the community, people say, oh, I think I'm so ADD or whatnot. Is it that it's overly overdiagnosed or underdiagnosed? What are your thoughts when it comes to that?
ADHD is a condition that's full of paradoxes, and one of the most interesting paradoxes is that I think it's at once one of the most underdiagnosed and overdiagnosed conditions, psychiatric conditions. Overdiagnosed certainly in a lot of cases because it's being diagnosed without proper assessment and so forth. I mean, an ADHD diagnosis should not take place with a 15-minute visit to your family practitioner. Somebody who's going to diagnose ADHD should really be an expert in their field, should have experience, and should go through a thorough assessment process in order to arrive at a differential diagnosis. But that said, there are also quite a number of people, especially adults, who are walking around out there hidden in plain sight, who are sometimes being treated for anxiety and depression, who may have the underlying condition of ADHD. I mean, that was what originally initiated my, my desire to seek out some help. Not that I knew I had ADHD, I had no clue at all. So there's a vast number of people out there who are underdiagnosed or undiagnosed, going undiagnosed, and at the same time, there is the issue with overdiagnosis and trying to attribute ADHD to maybe some things that, some other coexisting conditions.
You yourself became an ADHD coach. You opened up your own practice. Is that because you felt as though there wasn't enough support here in our community?
Yeah, one of the frustrations that I had when I was diagnosed, I guess, was trying to find local support. And there are plenty of online sources and so forth, but there really was nothing in the way of local dedicated ADHD support. And, it's not like I woke up one morning immediately following my diagnosis and said, I'm going to become a coach. I went through a 4-year process of self-discovery, really, where I went through what I like to refer to as the ADHD Trinity, learning to understand, accept, and embrace my ADHD. And that was a process, and that had some ups and downs, there's no doubt about it. But I found myself at a time where career transition presented itself, an opportunity for career transition presented itself. And it's become such a passion for me. And it kind of became the natural conclusion that, well, yeah, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And now I feel incredibly fortunate to be one of those people who I honestly believe that I'm doing what I'm meant to do.
Right. We just have a couple of minutes left, but I do want to talk about myths. Do you think there's a lot of myths surrounding ADHD?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, during the whole month I've been posting on my website one myth every day, so there are at least 31. But some of the more popular ones are that ADHD is somehow related to intelligence. Nothing could be further from the truth. Quite the opposite. Most people who have ADD and ADHD tend to be quite bright and have incredible strengths and incredible talents. That if they can tap into, I say to my daughter all the time, my daughter has ADHD as well, and I say to her all the time, I say, hon, if we can, you've got a superpower, if we can just figure out a way to use it for good, And so that's certainly a myth that there's a general inability, of people with ADD. Some other myths that exist are that it doesn't exist in adults, that people tend to grow out of it. Roughly about 60 to 70% of individuals who are diagnosed with ADHD as children will carry it into adulthood. So that's another very popular myth.
Right. I just wanted to know, of course, you have your own practice. If anybody wants further information about ADHD or coaching or whatnot, how can they get in touch?
My website is probably the easiest way. That's www.embraceyouradhd.ca. And I'm also part of a group, Spectrum Consultants Group, as you mentioned, where there are services offered in the areas of autism, naturopathic medicine, and also family-focused intervention. So to go directly to my website, embraceyouradhd.ca, and to go to the Spectrum Consultants Group website, it's spectrumconsultantsgroup.com.
Okay, well, Brett, I want to thank you very much for joining us. Lots of information for our viewers here this evening.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. We're going to take a very short break, but stay tuned. There's lots more to come here tonight on Out of the Fog.